Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire,
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
back on the broomstick.
Hi, and welcome to Back on the Broomstick. I'm Layla, and on this episode, we'll be talking about a witch's tools. What are they? Where did they come from? And how do you use them?
I'm Chelle, and tonight we're going to talk about something like the coolest things to have that you don't necessarily need. Is that a good way to put it?
Ooh, I guess so, but I do think that there are times when you might definitely need them.
Yeah, but there are times where it's not necessarily necessary, and we'll get into that.
That's right. We're going to cover all of the bases. What are a witch's tools? Where did they come from? And why or why not would you use them? Before we go too far, the first thing I want to say is that we're mostly going to be covering Western European, pretty much Wiccan-based.
I was going to say probably this is going to be more relevant to a Wiccan listener.
Well, that's where the use of them in modern witchcraft became popular, but they're not just for Wiccans.
Tools are definitely universal through a lot of different paths. Don't get us wrong.
That's right. But we're going to come at it from the angle where we learned it, how we came up with Buckland's big book with our very heavily Wiccan influenced background in rituals and magical spaces. So that's what we're going to come at this particular episode. But we will have episodes in the future where we go over lots of different tools from different places. But you'll be very familiar with these because they're in the magical lexicon. This is what you see when you go on TikTok or when you go on YouTube.
Or even when you walk into a occult, metaphysical, or magical orientated shop. These are going to be the things that are going to be front and center.
Exactly. So what we're talking about are things like a wand or an athame or an athame, depending on how you want to pronounce that.
You know, I was actually thinking that we should discuss this for a minute. What is with the different ways to say that? I always called it an athame, but now I'm hearing a lot more people calling it an athame, and I'm like, why are we changing the pronunciation, or have I been wrong for 30 years?
You know, that's a darn good question, and I think it comes down to a lot of, like, Samhain or Samhain. And I try not to shame anybody that says Samhain because odds are they've never heard it pronounced and they've just read it.
Right.
And I think that that's the same thing with an athame.
I mean, ultimately, however you say it, nothing is wrong.
So we were taught athame. From what I understand from my Gardnerian connections is that supposedly Gardner invented it. I don't know if that's true or not, the word itself. And he said athema. Athema?
So all of us are wrong, is what
Maybe
you're saying.
Maybe we're all wrong. Does it really matter how you say it? Not really. It's a ritual blade. It's a double-bladed.
I was going to say, if you're not familiar, it is a double-sided blade. Definitely not necessarily the sharpest out there, but a double-sided blade.
That's right. So we talked about Gardner and Gardnerian Wicca creating a lot of these tools, or really creating the need for a lot of these tools. And where a lot of them come from is older magical traditions. Gerald Gardner, Aleister Crowley, Doreen Valiente, all of those guys, they incorporated the use of magical tools from these other systems, like the Golden Dawn. They got them from the manuscript of the Key of Solomon, from the Jewish mystic traditions of the Kabbalah, from Muslim mystics, ceremonial magic, and from so many different places. I mean, these guys were all spiritualists. They were searching for magic and magicians and witches everywhere. So they incorporated these tools into the witchy belief system that they were creating. And they took the traditional meanings and uses and kept what worked. And they also added their own associations to make everything work in the system that they're creating.
That's kind of how I think of it, is they're kind of assigned like a quarter, an element, however you want to define that. So I look at an athame as like a fire south kind of tool. So if I have it placed on my altar, that's something I'm going to have kind of in the southern portion of my altar to represent south.
These tools come from these different magical traditions, and Gardner put them onto his earth-based religion, his form of witchcraft. And then that kind of got disseminated throughout the United States, mixed with a lot of folk magic, mixed with West African traditions where we get the djembe, the drum, and lots of different other cultures to form these tools. So let's give a quick little list. Let's list off a couple of the main tools that in our experience are in regular use by a lot of witches and magical practitioners today.
Okay, so we got an athame, which we can briefly touch on that whole thing that we talked about with the tarot cards with swords and wands. Chalice, cauldron.
A staff or a stang,
Yep.
a bowline, although I almost never see that. A bowline is a sickle shaped knife. It looks like a moon, a crescent moon with a white handle. And it's traditionally used for work, basically harvesting herbs and things like that. And I've heard of one.
Never seen one.
I mean, I have seen them before. They're beautiful, usually kind of expensive, but I've almost never seen one in actual use.
I think they're hard to come by.
Yeah, they're pretty and they're cool. They're not a very practical knife, but they're kind of cool looking.
Candles, obviously.
Yes, definitely. Candles are a very common item that witches use in spell work. They're not technically one of the traditional tools of witchcraft, but they're used for pretty much everything in spellcraft and ritual for witches today.
Yeah.
I have drums, herbs, crystals, jars, candles, things like that. A broom and an altar cloth, incense.
Seashells.
Okay, now we're kind of repeating things. Basically, what a tool does is it helps you to direct your energy. It helps you to have a physical representation of different types of energy on your altar in order to help you in your spell work or your ritual.
They're kind of, I kind of look at it as each quarter pentacle. That's what I was forgetting. Because each quarter and then deity kind of has its quote unquote tool. So, we talked about athame in the south for fire. The cauldron would be west for water. The wand or the staff would be east for air. I personally generally use like a stone or something of that nature is my north tool.
And the traditional tool for north would be the pentacle.
Right. Or I was going to say, or the pentacle. And then for deity, honestly, that's where I kind of use a candle as a tool.
I also like to have representations of deity on my altar as well. And you can have a representation like a statue for deity.
True.
But Chelle likes to use a candle for deity. You can use traditional god and goddess colors if you want to, or colors associated with that particular deity.
Let me tell you why, because not at every point in my life have I been able to afford a beautiful, gorgeous, fancy statue. And I know that those aren't always easily obtainable for people.
Right.
So back in the day, it was a candle. That's what I had. That's what I had to use. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yep.
obviously now I have some statuary and it's gorgeous, but that's not always something that people have on the ready, whereas a candle is
Right.
something you have on the ready generally.
And that gets into a topic I definitely wanted to touch on with tools is that they are a physical representation of an idea. And that's a big part of magic is you really want to get your subconscious, your magical brain, that part of your brain when you're in a magical state or when you're meditating, when you can really affect change. Having a physical representation can help that energy get more easily into your subconscious. Any representation that you can associate works. Therefore, a gold candle will represent the god, and a silver candle will represent the goddess very easily.
So it's like cooking. There's substitutions.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, like for me, the things I like to use to represent the god are usually antlers. I love to use antlers because I do love to work with Carnunos.
And on the flip side of that, I have used a butter knife as an athame before, just saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotta do what you gotta do.
So things for a god would be anything that you would associate with the god. Any phallic symbols, you could use a wand or an athame to represent the god. And in some traditions, they do. There are specific rituals where that's done. For the goddess, you would do things that would represent the womb or the vulva, chalice, shells, the triple moon. That's because Wicca and a lot of earth-based practices really have a lot of themes revolving around procreation, the act of creating life. And that, more often than not, requires male and female forces and energies to create and to reproduce life. But that's just one perspective. There are a multitude of ways to view deity that don't involve genders or reproduction at all. Like everything, your mileage may vary, and you need to do what works for you.
There has been times where I have actually printed out pictures of deity and used that on my altar to represent deity, kind of have that visual picture of whoever, say it was Kali, take a picture of Kali and have that on the altar to represent deity. So there's a lot of different things you can do with that.
The idea is to have these items to honor the elements, to honor what they're representing, and also to assist you in your spell work. They again are a tangible, real world representation of that energy that you're trying to call up. So that makes it a lot easier for you to do it. Like if you're trying to call up fire, to call up that energy, you can think about it. You can hold an athame, you can think about it being forged in fire, and that's a great way to call that energy. But how much easier is it if you're looking at the flame of a candle or at a bonfire while you're trying to do that?
Right. And I think kind of a chalice is like, when you are drinking from the chalice, you're kind of taking things in. You're being receptive, I guess is probably a good word. I guess the best way I look at it is it represents you not necessarily consuming things literally, but kind of more figuratively consuming.
Yeah, exactly. By doing the literal act, you can also use the figurative energy, the magical energy also comes with it. So say you're doing a spell where you want to fill yourself with more confidence. You could whip up some tea, a tea spell and put it in your chalice.
And
And
then
then
literally fill yourself with confidence.
exactly, you are performing an act in the physical world with the physical representations of energy to affect that same type of change in the magical realm. It's like a mind body magical connection, it's a loop. And that's what you're trying to trigger with using these tools. And there's also the honoring of the element part that comes into it too.
And I've also been in situations where the wand has been used to represent deity, and therefore incense and an incense burner was used on the altar as a tool to represent air. So if you do, if you are using something like the wand for deity, you can kind of interchange different things to represent the element that it's also associated with.
So back when we were involved in the large pagan community and with our own coven, whenever we would set up a ritual, most of the time, I mean, we did stray from this formula, but there was kind of a formula that we followed.
Yeah, yeah. Altar setup, so to say.
Yeah, exactly. In the East, we would have objects that represented air, incense, feathers, flowers, wands, anything that represented air.
Yellow things, and if we did quarter candles, we'd have a yellow candle there. In the South, it would be athames, it would be fire, it would be candles burning, red candles burning.
Yep. And in the West, we would have your cauldrons, chalices, any type of liquid. We would have blue things,
Seashells.
representations of water.
And then in the North, we've had everything from rocks to dirt to pine cones, kind of those earthy things.
The first fruits from people's gardens.
Baked goods like breads, things of that nature, earthy things.
Earthy things. And then in the center, we would have a small bonfire, but we would also have a deity altar where we would have representations of the god and the goddess, the Lord and Lady. For us, those represent ideas. There's a full spectrum between all of that, and they represent the whole thing. You might say the goddess, but she's represents the inner energy, taking things in. She's receptive. She's hearth and home. She's creation. She's destruction. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a goddess. And the same thing with the god.
It can just be deity.
That's right. Could just be deity. But then you put your representations there, whatever deity means to you, whatever spirit means to you.
And again, we've done, candles, purple candles, we've done statuary, we've done lots of things.
All sorts of stuff, yeah. And then there's always, we've talked about this in a previous episode, but with the whole Wiccan roots, there have been times, particularly for Beltane, when the Great Rite, which is a Wiccan tradition, it's basically
the coming together of the god and the goddess.
That's right. And it's you take your athame and chalice, and your high priest and high priestess would be one would hold the athame, one would hold the chalice, and there would be a whole back and forth that they would say, Let it be known that no man is greater than a woman.
For what one lacks, the other shall
Yeah,
provide.
something like that. There's a few
That whole
things in
thing.
between, that
That
whole
whole
thing.
thing.
But then you put the athame into the chalice to represent both sex and, like you said, the union of male and female. So there's all sorts of stuff that you can do with those.
We've even had a vase of flowers represent deity. It's whatever it means to you. And, we're kind of talking about traditional tools here, but, you know, whatever those elements mean to you and what you're going to associate them with can be what your tool is for that.
Yeah, it really comes down to a mindset. And for me, having magical tools, especially ones that have been used repeatedly in ceremony and ritual, a lot like the traditional tools that we used all the time in the pagan community that we came up in, using them repeatedly helps to create an atmosphere, a vibe, and really helps to get me into the flow state of magic.
There is a time and place for everything. If you are doing, ceremonial high magic, absolutely. All the bells and whistles, everything in its exact proper location. But on the flip side, if you need to just throw something together, that's good enough too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have several altars throughout my house, and some are more formal than others with where things are placed. Sometimes things are just kind of placed in an elven chest sort of fashion.
I kind of have an interesting altar setup. It's like any surface that's available.
Pretty much, yeah. It becomes an altar. Either that or I pile books on it. It's one of the two.
Yeah, yeah, we that's the thing is like altars almost turn into a collection of things.
They
I've
do.
got stones, I've got pine cones, I've got wheat, I've got candles, like I've got lots of things.
And the cool thing about that is those are all things that are important to you. They have meaning, they have
Right.
magic, they have weight to them. So when you grab that pine cone, you remember where you got it. That says forest to you, that says earth that you know, that says God. And so that makes it so easy for you to call that kind of energy.
And honestly, having kind of like a quote unquote tool collection, different things, I might pull if I'm looking for assistance with say love and happiness, I might pull a rose quartz, whereas if I'm looking for something a little more financially based, I might pull a green aventurine, so it gives me the opportunity to pick and choose what I need for what purpose and intention.
Yes. You pick a rose quartz because we know what the qualities of rose quartz are. We've been told.
Right.
People have been using it for this for a very long time. That kind of gets into the idea that it has these qualities because people have been saying it has them and working with it in that way for a very long time. But even though history can kind of give a certain confidence, you don't have to take their word for it. You can spend your own time with tools and use that time and then find out for yourself how they work best for you, what categories they belong in for you. I remember with a witch from Connecticut that I had the great luck to train with, and she did this thing where she called it a stoning, and it wasn't the weed kind, which I was kind of expecting, but she handed me different crystals that I was just a little witchling at the time. I didn't know all these crystals. She had this huge collection. So she had me sit down, get into an alpha state, no weed involved, sadly, and she would hand me different stones, different crystals, and ask me how I felt about it. And she kind of write them down, each one. And then afterwards, we went over what like the actual meaning of the stone was compared.
How right were you?
They were all pretty close. Some of them were, kind of tangential connections there. Some of them had different meanings for me, but and that's because we have these ideas of what colors mean. You grow up with the idea that green means money.
And pink means love. Yeah, yeah.
Right, right. So we have these ideas, these archetypes in our head. That's part of what can make some of these tools so powerful, the weight we give it. Okay, I got one more story. This one is to show you how easily we can fool our brains into giving something importance and energy.
Okay.
When I was training to be a hypnotherapist, one of the things that you learn as a hypnotist is presentation is everything, right? You got to,
Right?
brain hacking is a big part of what we do. We were taught whenever you go to give a presentation or if you're giving some type of workshop, always have someone else introduce you before you go on to speak.
Why?
Because that automatically makes you an expert in the minds of the audience. Only important people get
Get
introduced.
introduced.
Exactly.
Nice.
Before you even walk out on stage, you have gained authority and presence without even trying. And that's because our brains are trained to think in certain ways. And
Right.
you can hack into that by using green stones for money, you know? And that's why we like tools, because tools can help us get there.
That's kind of actually the point of tools is that physical and visual representation. If you are looking to project something out, you're going to want to use your wand or your athame, just like Harry Potter, and kind of project that shit out in a way.
Even the shape of a wand looks like it should be projecting energy out.
Right, right. But then again, if you're using a candle, that might be kind of more of a burning spirit, a representation of passion, a representation of action, of things being handled and taken care of. So, that's why I also think that sometimes, especially when we get into we talked with the tarot about the swords and the wands debate. You could say the same thing with the altar tools. Some people think that the athame is air and that the wand is fire. If that's what it means to you, then great. That's just as great as it meaning the opposite to me.
Personally, I very much feel that objects have their own power. I think that herbs, crystals, earth, everything, I think
That's the whole
everything,
animism thing.
yeah, exactly. Everything has its own energy and power. And when I ask them to assist me, they lend their power to that. And so I do very strongly believe that that can help.
For that to happen, I do feel that you need to create a bond with your tools.
Oh, yeah.
You need to spend time exchanging energy with your tools and working with your tools. You don't just buy it from the store and then just have this bond with it to do your bidding, so to say.
Right.
So there is an element of connecting with your tools, whether it's the herbs or the athames or the wands or the chalices. Like you have to create that bond to be able to work together.
Yes. And that's why personal items that mean something to you are so cool because you already have that bond. You don't have to do any work. It's already there. Or
Right.
something that you have created. That bond's already there. Sometimes you can see that really gorgeous piece of steel in the magic shop and feel a connection, but other times you
Right.
have to create it.
Right. Right. And like going back to this rose quartz, I bought this particular one that I'm showing you because it was flat and I thought it was pretty interesting that it was flat. So I have it here kind of next to my working space. And there's been times where I just sit here and rub it. I don't know why I rub it because it's flat and it's cool to do that with. That's kind of now I can call on the stone and ask it for assistance with things because we've exchanged
Yes.
energy. We've spent time together. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And honestly, okay, this is going to sound a little weird, but rubbing things is a good way to put your energy on it. But let me throw a little science at you that helps me to kind of feel that way and feel that that's not entirely weird. Have you ever taken a needle and rubbed it with cloth to give it like a static electric charge and make it a mild magnet?
Oh,
Okay, how about rubbing a balloon on your head to stick it on the wall?
yep.
When you rub a balloon on your hair or you rub silk along a needle, what's happening is electrons move from the more negatively charged item to the more positively charged one. And that gives it a temporary static electric charge. And that's why you can stick the balloon on the wall. Now, you can also take a magnet and rub it along a piece of metal in the same direction repeatedly, and that will turn that piece of metal into a magnet. And it does that because running the magnet along it makes the atoms all line up kind of and go in the same direction, and it turns that metal into a magnet. And that process is called magnetization by stroking. You can do that, right? Because that changes the alignment of the atoms and it turns them magnetic.
I'm gonna try that, because I've never heard of
Yeah.
that
You
before.
are actually physically affecting something when you do that. So in my mind, when I am holding something in my hands, or if I am, petting it or
Rubbing it,
rubbing it, maybe rubbing it down with nice oils or some herbs or something. Throw on some cool music, get some incense going.
candlelight,
Little
different podcast.
Hey, if you want to romance your tools, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, create a connection with them that way. Talk to them. I'd like to talk to my herbs before I work with them in a spell or put them in a joint. It's
Be
nice.
honest, you talk to your weed before you smoke it.
I do. Oh my gosh, I used to talk to my plants so
I
much.
remember, and I used to call you crazy.
Well, you still do. That's not, nothing's changed.
No,
No. So those are really good ways, and you might want to cleanse them first if they were someone else's tools, or if you got it at a
at a
yard
store.
sale.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you want to cleanse any energy there from manufacturing or from other people who've handled it, and after that, then put your energy onto it.
But and this used to drive my kids crazy, absolutely bonkers. I am like a rock collector, okay? Like I will just see something. I'm one of those people that like I'll just be walking down the street and like some shiny rock on the ground attracts my eye and I pick it up. And they're like, "Well, that just looks like a brown pebble. Why is it special?" I don't know. It is. Don't question me. Maybe you have a little pebble that is a gray pebble that you found on the sidewalk. That can be just as good and have just as much a connection as the rose quartz that you buy at the store.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I'm actually a big fan of using things that you just kind of find on your own, like rocks on the sidewalk or pine cones, or make your wand out of a stick that you found in the yard. You know what I mean?
I am forever doing this. I have snake skins on my altar. I have the last dandelion puff from my yard in a jar on my altar. I
So,
have
are we
sticks
called
and
nature pack
stones.
rats? Is that what we are?
Kind of.
Nature pack rats?
Silvio, the beautiful human that gave us those two broom paintings, called me out on it at the Central New York Pagan Pride this summer because we were all talking after our workshops and I had been picking up, you'd been doing it too. I've been picking up
Acorns.
acorns and oak and those little oak leaf branches that had fallen
Yeah.
off the tree. And I was like clutching
Stuffing
them
them in
like a
our
weird little
pockets.
squirrel. And Silvio called me out on it. It was very cute. Hi, Silvio. We love you.
We love you.
But it was adorable. They were like, "Are you taking all those home?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, I am."
Okay, right here, a baby little acorn
Yep.
that we got from CNY Pagan Pride Day.
I have a bunch of them on my altar as well. Now, oh, speaking of, in the same place where I'm going to have to put up a picture because it's super cute. I have this cute little shelf that I have a whole bunch of my nature hoarding stuff on. But on it, I have another tool that you and I created together, our Ouija boards.
Oh, yes. Awesome.
We created Ouija boards out of cardboard
And a Sharpie marker.
and a Sharpie marker. We even made planchettes. We each have one. They work great, by the way.
If you want to see a picture, we did post it back when we talked about it. So scroll back on the old Instagram and you will find the pictures.
So making your own, making a connection with it is a really, really good idea that will also help you kind of tap into it. Maybe you have an athame, but it doesn't feel like fire to you. Maybe it feels more like something you use to carve runes or sigils into your candles.
Right.
Maybe it feels differently. And so you kind of have to pay attention to that. A lot like with our charm casting, you have to spend a little time with each of your tools and decide how it feels for you.
And that's why, going back to creating that bond, you have to spend the time with it as you would spend time with a friend or with a loved one. You got to put in that energy and work to create that relationship because there will be a point where you're going to ask it to assist you in some sort of magical working and you need to have that bond created to kind of ask that favor. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Exactly. And that makes it so much easier, especially if you have any type of difficulty visualizing, having these tools in front of you can really help you focus your magical energy to affect the change that you're looking for.
So maybe you want to know, how do I cleanse my tools? What do I do to cleanse these tools that I just bought from some fabulous shop online?
Or local, buy local.
Buy local. So I know that you have probably used a few different ways, as have I. Smoke cleansing. I've done water cleansing. I've done air cleansing, plunged it into the earth. That's what I do with my athame, actually, because I did get a new one not too terribly long ago and kind of plunged it into the earth to create that bond. So there's going to be a lot of ways that may work for you cleansing wise, but I've used all of those ways: smoke, earth, water, fire,
The type of tool might
dictate how you cleanse it.
exactly, you're not going to always want to put crystals in water, depending on the kind of crystal. You might not also want to leave them out overnight to bathe in the moonlight.
Probably not a good idea to cleanse your wand with fire either.
That's right. Your wooden wand should not be cleansed with fire.
The only other thing I would add is sometimes people want to do like a blessing on it too. So maybe, if you're doing a smoke cleanse on it, then you can do some sort of verbal blessing along with that. But again, that's really just personal preference.
Yeah, you can go as simple or as elaborate with this as you want to. You can just take this tool and be like, mine. And then you're good.
But then there's also full ceremonies for it.
Right. You can create a cleansing smoke, and then a blessing oil. You can create ritual herbs. You could name it. You could inscribe, literally carve or etch or do it in oil or chalk a name onto the tool. You can consecrate it to a deity or to yourself or to a specific purpose. You could speak words over it. You can get as elaborate as you like or as simple.
You did name your broom.
I did. Hagatha. I love her. My lovely base home. I did have the pleasure of talking to the wonderful hags over at Three Moon Brooms while they were being created. We were lucky enough to be able to get custom matching brooms from them. When she first started creating our brooms, I got pictures and I immediately knew Hagatha. And just like I said, sometimes you walk into a store and something will call to you and
You immediately know. Yep.
you know, that's right. A long time ago, I got a whole bunch of green egg magazines, which then sadly I lost entirely in a flood. But before I had met pagans, that was a big connection for me of learning about paganism and about other people who practiced. But I had gotten them at a secondhand shop. And from one of the people that I had met at some point who knew about witchcraft, I had gotten the idea that you weren't ever supposed to haggle for a magical tool. So when I saw these magazines, they were priced at like $2 each, and there was a good 20 or so of them. And I didn't have the money. So I'm like, hold on to these. I'll come back with the money. I came back and someone else was on shift. And I said, hey, that's my pile of magazines. I'm here to pay. They bring them over, start flipping through it. And they're like, oh, $2 each. That's too much. I'll give you the whole stack for $2. I said, sold.
Patience is a virtue.
That's right. Put the money down and got the fuck out. But in that is where I found the poem Never Again the Burning. I learned so much from these magazines. But the point here is that sometimes a magical tool that is meant to find you will just call to you and find you. And you might not necessarily need to clean it.
And at that point in your life, green egg was your magical tool.
Oh my gosh, yes. I love those magazines so much. I scour eBay for them. When they come up and I can afford them, I snatch them up, man. But yeah, so it could be anything. And do you have a favorite tool, I guess, is my next question.
You know, oddly enough, I actually thought about this because I figured that we would probably somehow circle back to, do I have a favorite tool? I do. And it's actually going to have to be my pentacle necklace. And that is because, you might be in a situation where I don't have my athame with me. I don't take that shit to work. But no matter where I go and what I do, I've got that pentacle with me. It can be is a tool to project, to manifest, to protect, just as I would use it on an altar. Sometimes I use it wrapped around my neck because I do think that sigils and such are also tools as well. So honestly, it's probably my pentacle necklace.
I had to think about it. I'm a magpie, I guess. I like pretty things. I like to have things on my altar. I like earthy things. And I do like to have representations of the elements and deity on my altar or when I'm doing a spell. But when I thought about it, the biggest thing I want to have when I'm doing a spell is smoke. I like incense or I like a smokable spell. If I have incense, it feels like a spell to me, I guess. So maybe it's because I'm an air sign. I don't know. But incense of some type, which I guess isn't really a traditional tool.
Funny because my backup would have been an athame, which doesn't seem like something I would pick, but for some reason it was what I kept going back to.
That was the other thing I thought of. I went back and forth because I do also like athames, but I like wands and I could just keep going down the list.
I have a cauldron collection. I don't know.
Right? I have chalices and cauldrons and I have pentacle stuff. I like representations of the elements, but I would have to say when I really, really think about it, if I have incense, it feels like a spell to me. And then also for ritual, if I'm doing a big ritual, but it doesn't really feel like a ritual to me unless there's drumming.
See, now funny because if for ritual wise, I'm going to have to go with my cord. It feels like a ritual if I have my cord. Yeah.
Honestly, that is a tool we did not list when we listed our list. So we talked about the athame. Traditionally, it's double bladed because, was it words and actions can both cut or something like that?
Correct.
And it has a black handle, a symbol of masculine energy traditionally. Bells, we didn't talk about bells, but those can be traditional to ward off negativity. Let's see, cauldron and chalice, feminine, pentacle symbol, bowling. But we did not talk about the cord. That is also traditional from Gardnerian magic, and we also had cords in our coven.
Now, it can be a lot of different things. Some traditions, some covens kind of use cords, kind of like a name badge of your status.
It's a long rope that's usually multiple long ropes braided together that you wear around your waist like a belt that indicates status or rank.
Yes. But, it also can kind of be the ties that bind us too.
Correct. Yes.
You know, we've used cords in hand fastings to bond people together. I've cut cords to cut cords.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So whatever, it's again another tool that can be multi-purpose, but in a ritual setting, once I tie my cord around my waist, it's almost like, all right, game on. We're ready.
For me, cords I only associate with covens. I never use a cord if I'm just doing a ritual, like say at a festival or at a workshop or something like that. I associate cords strictly with coven.
I guess I never thought of it that way. You might not be terribly wrong, but it's not necessary. It's just how you look
No,
at it.
you could. If you wanted to create a cord for yourself, again, it's just a braided, traditionally 9 feet long once it's all braided, 3 braids, so 9 cords total, 9 ropes, 3 braids. Usually the colors mean something. When you're initiated, you get a white cord, and then you get added different colors as you go through the different levels to indicate your training. But you could use cords for different things. If you wanted to do cord for yourself, you could do it for your own level of training.
Cords are big use in hand fastings as well.
Hand fast. I do have a hand fasting cord on a shelf right above one of my hand fasting cord on a shelf, but I don't really use it for anything. But other people do. Chelle wears one all the time when she goes out with her coven.
Well, it's my thing.
And robes, sometimes different groups will have traditional dress, but the ones that you mostly see are going to be earth representations like a pentacle, the chalice, the blade, the candle, the incense. And these are really elemental aspects typically. And they mostly come from Wiccan history.
Yeah, but I'm a fan of my tools. I am a fan of my tools, and even though I've kind of spent some time pulling away from Wiccan specific, I'm centric. I take my tools with me. Take my tools with me.
And I like the representations. I like representing the natural world around me. I like representing the energies that I'm hoping to work with. That feels good and right to me when I'm doing a spell or a ritual.
Well, and the only example that keeps popping into my head is remember that time we did that dream walk? And what we did was we tied our cords around our waist on one end, tied the other end of our cord around our athame, and plunged our athame into the ground to kind of tie us to the real world, so to say.
We were going into the Fey realm. We were traveling to Avalon for that one.
We were, and we kind of used almost like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, making sure we had a way back.
There's another example of a cord. It was within a coven setting, but that was a magical use of a cord.
Exactly. The ties that, and like I said, the ties that bind us.
Mm-hmm.
But that is an example I keep thinking of with the cord and the athame, kind of grounding you into the real world or grounding you into a specific point.
That's really the point of all these is we use that as a physical representation of what we magically wanted to do.
Right.
And that's really what all of these are. These are objects for you to work with their natural energy to direct your will. And that's what magic is, really. So there are lots of other tools that we didn't cover. Again, we just kind of went with our personal roots, which is very Western European Wiccan based, with a little bit of animism and folk magic thrown in because we like the natural things. We like them to represent the natural world.
And, if you have tools that are different or used differently, that is absolutely fantastic. This is just kind of what we have kind of been trained and know and have practiced throughout the years.
I know we're going to get people that are going to yell at us. And Jonathan, our beloved Jonathan,
Love
also
him.
gave us a little bit of crap. Not really. Love you, Jonathan. But in ceremonial magic, if you do go back into the Golden Dawn and into high magic of the Kabbalah and things like that, blades are air. So they always use swords and athames for air. And that's, again, something very different than what we do. We're more elemental, earthy, down in the earth.
Refer back to our swords versus wands tarot episode previously, because that's my
Right.
thoughts on it here too.
But my point with this is just that your associations may vary, and that is perfectly valid and okay. It really is very important that your tools reflect your feelings and your beliefs, because it's not going to work for you if you try to
If
go
it doesn't.
counter, to your own personal beliefs. If you're holding a chalice and you're trying to force yourself to say this chalice filled with water represents earth, and it just doesn't feel right to you, it's your spell's not going to work.
That just doesn't sound right.
Right. It has to work for you, or the magic will not flow. So the more comfortable you with your associations, the better you feel about your associations, the better those tools will work magically for you.
I just think that, tools, it's just another collection, obsession.
We like shiny things
I like shiny things.
and tarot
like,
decks.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you can never have enough, in my opinion.
I agree. All right. Well, I am going to go dust off one of my altars, because every time we talked about a tool, I was looking at it. I'm like, I've been neglecting that one. It needs to be cleaned up.
And I'm actually going to take some photos and post some pictures, because I know people are going to ask. They're going to say, I want to see your altars. I want to see your tools. So yeah, I'm going to get going on some of that.
So if you want to check out our photos, check out our Instagram, our Facebook, our Blue Sky. You can also check us out on YouTube or our website. And we are back on the broomstick everywhere, except I think on Blue Sky we are
BOTB Podcast.
BOTB Podcast on Blue Sky, but everywhere else we're back on the broomstick.
And don't forget, folks, we do have a P.O. Box. If you want to send us some mail, P.O. Box 106, Salem, Massachusetts, 01970.
Chelle and I will actually be getting together here in the next couple weeks, and we will be recording a mail call, Solarium, to talk about all the wonderful things and the lovely birthday cards and everything that you all have sent.
I'm actually super excited because we've gotten some really, really cool shit in the mail, and I cannot wait to talk about it on air.
Our listeners are so much fun. You guys are amazing. How cool. Anyway, so thank you all so much for listening. We will talk to you next week. In the meantime, stay wise, stay wicked,
And keep it witchy, folks.